I've hit it. It should come up. Right, it should be recording now. Can I ask, as a team effort, if everybody could perhaps just keep an eye on that red dot, and if it goes out, let me know if it stops recording, because it stopped recording a bit earlier in a meeting, well, actually the one with you, James, earlier. So then I was busy scribbling notes afterwards because for some reason it stopped recording before the end, which was a bit annoying. So I'd appreciate that if anyone can notice that, can just flag it. So we're just I'll just run through the agenda briefly with you. So we're just going to do a few introductions. I think in this, oh, sorry, John, I've just noticed you've got your hand up. Would you? Sam?
Yeah, sorry. I was just wondering when an agenda was sent. I don't seem to have received one.
Oh, it should be in the calendar invite. I sent an update.
Ah, right. Okay. Beg your pardon. Thank you.
No worries. Yeah, so we're going to have a few introductions to start with, because for this meeting we normally have the advisory group meeting every quarter, and this, because it's the end of the pilot, we've invited everybody from the working groups to join us as well for this one, so there might be people who don't know each other. And then I'm going to give you a quick brief Farming for Carbon and Nature sort of general programme update on where we're at with the pilot project and going forwards. And then Helen Glanville from Loughborough University is going to give you an update on where we're at with the soil testing from the 1,000 samples that we took over the 10 farms this summer. And then Celine from SOS-UK is going to give us an update on the biodiversity surveying that was done on all the farms. And there'll be an opportunity for Q&A for Helen and Celine as well. Then we'll just take a short 5-minute break. And then Rachel, who heads up our impact team at SOS-UK, is going to give an update on the outcomes from the students that were involved in the soil sampling and the biodiversity monitoring. They filled in surveys before they got involved and afterwards, so we've got the results of the impact the experience had on them. And then we're going to welcome Liz, who's on the call from Farm Carbon Toolkit, Liz Bowles, who will be talking about the report that they've been working on as part of the NERF funded work that we're doing as part of the Farming for Carbon and Nature. And then we'll a few next steps, because it's the end of the pilot programme, and to finish by 5 o'clock. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Is that all sound okay? Fantastic, thank you. I'm going to hand you over to Adette now, just to do a few introductions.
Hello, really lovely to see some of you, well, new faces, and also people who I haven't seen in over a year. So yeah, nice to be back. Because we didn't know kind of how many people are attending, we've done a slightly different format. Normally we kind of go around the group, but having a bit of a Slido fun for today. So if you could join on your, it might be easiest just to scan the QR code on your phone, that's how I find it easiest to join, or you can go to slido.com and join on a different browser, if that's what you find easiest. So yeah, what best represents you? You can see our spread for today. I'll just give it a couple more seconds and then move on to the next question. So as you can see, the sustainability sector, people catching up, but that's who we've got most representation on, but lovely to see that we've got a lot of people from different areas joining us today. So now on to the more fun questions. What's your view on Marmite? We were trying to think of something controversial that we could get a spread of everyone in here. Are you a lover or a hater, or are you somewhere in the middle, which I think is potentially one of the most controversial? I like that additional reaction, Andy. And an almost equally, well, potentially what's more important question, could you rank these holidays for us? What do you think is it'd be nice to get the feel of the room. What are our farmers enjoying and what are academics enjoying? I can't see any more movement. So that felt like a very easy decision there. I think a remote walking holiday, also true to my heart. That's where I go. Has won. So well, it seems like we've got some like-minded people here. I know exactly what Tilly would have rated and Joanna #1 there. I'm sure there was a lot of warmth there. They've been pushing that up the rankings. And then just a really quick one. If there's one or two words that you wanted to share with us, we thought it might be nice to kind of capture all together as part of our team, either on your working groups or advisory groups, around like the best bits about farming for carbon and nature, like anything you've enjoyed. Please add multiple answers. Or one, whatever you fancy.
I'm not sure it's working, Adette. It's not working for me. It's coming up with a question and answer.
Oh, well, that's weird. Well, there you go. You can all get out of doing this then. That's very nice. Let's not get into the depths of Slidos. The most important thing is we figured out what all our ideal holiday is. So, you know, if we get some future funding, we'll know to go somewhere we can do some remote walking for a get together. So thank you very much for that. We just thought we'd do something a bit different, didn't we, Tilly?
Yeah, we can always, if you've got any things that you were coming to mind, you can always add them in the chat. It would be interesting to know. And I think that some things have come through as questions. Students challenging my thinking and engaging students in an area very close to their hearts, with environmental science and geography department, and holding money bags, universities to account.
Yes.
So yeah, they're all really good. But I don't know why. Yeah, it's not showing up on.
That sounds like a really sensible suggestion, Tilly. So yeah, thank you. Add anything you'd like to share with us in the chat, or you can always pop us an email as well. Great. Well, I will hand over back to you, Tilly. I will move the slides. So just give me the nod.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Well, just first update before I go on to the slide is that I just wanted to update you. Maybe I should have done this before Adette did the intro bit, but that Kate, who most of you will have met, will be leaving SOS-UK next week because it's the end of her maternity cover that she was doing covering Adette. So over the past year, Kate's done a fantastic job of leading on all the biodiversity work with Celine, as well as leading on the financial model element of FCN that we got the NERF funding for. And she established clear evidence of why soil carbon credits are not a scientifically robust option for farming for carbon and nature, and has helped shape what we plan to offer as a paid for programme next year. So with Kate's departure, obviously Adette is back, which is fantastic. It's great to have you back, Adette. So that's a staffing update. But now, Adette, if you could move on slides, I'll give you a more project-specific updates. So this diagram, or something similar, will be familiar to most of you. It shows the structure of how we've run the FCN pilot project. And representatives from each working group have been members of the advisory group to help make sure that our work wasn't siloed and that people were able to sort of cross-fertilise their ideas through the groups. And myself, Adette and Kate have ensured that the farm group has been able to feed into the soil and biodiversity groups and vice versa. And then also the information and data from the soil and biodiversity groups has fed into the financial model working group to help develop a long-term financial model for FCN. hopefully, what we've been trying all along is to find this model that works for universities, colleges, farmers, as well as students. So I'm not going to update you on the soil or biodiversity working groups because Helen and Celine will be doing that shortly. But a brief update on the farm working group. So we had an interesting speaker join our farm working group meeting in October and talk about farm soil health principles. And we're currently midway through doing the annual farm interviews that we've been conducting over the past 3 years, which will feed into our end of pilot report. And then a brief update on the financial model working group. Kate has finished collecting the data from the Freedom of Information requests that we sent out. This was to find out what agricultural land institutions own, how much of it they own, and whether it's tenanted or not. And Kate has also completed some in-depth market research interviews to find out what institutions would be willing to pay for regarding an FCN programme. And we're planning to do some more research and some quantitative research to complement that in the new year. And Liz will be from Farm Carbon Toolkit, as I mentioned, will be sharing an update of the fantastic consultancy work that they've been doing for us into the costs and benefits of implementing different agroecological farming practices. So that's the working groups. The other thing we've been working on this quarter is applying for some extension funding for FCN. If you could go on to the next slide, please, Adette. Thank you. So in the last advisory group meeting, I shared that we'd just been successful in the first stage of our bid for extension funding from Esby Fairbairn Foundation. We've now submitted the main application for phase 2 of Farming for Carbon and Nature. So we had the pilot phase and now it's going into phase 2. And this is to build on the work that we've completed during the pilot. We'll be notified towards the end of January whether we've been successful or not. We were hoping we would have a decision by the meeting today, but they've decided to not put our application into December's board meeting and put it into January's instead. We're hoping that's because there might be more likely that we'll get funded that way. So we're hoping that's that's a positive thing. But I just wanted to give you a brief summary of what we've put in the application. So if we're successful, this is what we'd plan to do post-pilot. So I think most of you know this now, but just to clarify, through the work of our FCN pilot, we have decided not to go down the route of carbon offsetting and carbon credits. So core work at SOS-UK is selling sustainability programmes to universities on an academic year basis. So that's the model we're going to follow for phase 2 of FCN. Our plan is to offer universities a paid for innovative programme that supports an agroecological farming transition in the tertiary education sector. That
feel like has Tilly dropped? Oh.
Yeah, she's frozen for me.
Yeah, she's
Okay.
for me. I was wondering, I wonder, is it my internet? But I think it's hers, if it's not just me.
You're back. Are you back, Tilly?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll turn my camera off. Maybe that'll be better. Maybe it's, yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we got up to about the programme that supports the agroecological farming transition in the tertiary education sector. So I'll hand back over to you from there.
Perfect, thank you, Adette. Right, so I didn't go on for ages unheard. That's great, thanks. So so there are 4 main areas that we put in the application form of areas of work we want to focus on post-pilot in phase 2 of FCN. So firstly, we want to build on the farm data collection and market research that was started during the pilot. So this would involve collecting and sharing comparative soil carbon and biodiversity data for over 1,200 hectares of UK farmland, this would be of value to the farmers, and the soil carbon analysis was likely to be published in academic papers by Helen, hopefully, and others in the soil working group, contributing to seriously lacking UK data in this area. And then also quantitative surveying of universities to complement qualitative market research undertaken in the pilot. And then, as well as being able to carry on that work and build on what we've done in the pilot, to be able to support those 10 farms that we've been with during the pilot project and we feel it's really important to get that comparative data. We also want to shape, test and launch a new paid-for programme based on what we learnt during the pilot. So the pilot has shown us that we can create a paid-for programme that can positively contribute to carbon and nature and positivity on farms, and potentially increase biodiversity on the farmland owned by institutions, as well as engaging students in really meaningful activities and raise awareness about the need for more sustainable food and farming in the UK. So the plan is that we'll initially work with 3 to 5 universities to test this new paid-for programme. And what we'll offer them is potentially, and this is room for development, but advice on their land related greenhouse gas emissions accounting and reporting, support for farmers on their land, and engagement with students in soil carbon sampling and testing, as well as the biodiversity monitoring. And then the third area that Esme Fairbairn were keen that we did is about disseminating the knowledge that we've learned through the pilot phase, so that it can be of use to others. So we plan to do this by delivering sessions at appropriate national events like EAUC, Groundswell, ORFC, those kind of events. Use existing SOS-UK contacts to get coverage in tertiary education media outlets. Offer to share and exchange knowledge with others working in this area as well, and that could be webinars, newsletters, etc. And then the third main area that we want to work in is around supporting students to create change within their institutions. So as our FCN work matures, we'd like to encourage and support the students who get involved to take action following when they've done the biodiversity monitoring or soil sampling, to use that enthusiasm that they've had and motivation for getting involved to help them take up action to create further positive change related to farmland on their with their institutions. And that could be around eating, producing, growing, buying, selling food on campus, any kind of area, but just carrying on their journey with their interest and in where their food comes from. So that's that's a summary of what we're applying for. So we'll let you know at the end of January if we are successful or not. Does anybody have any very brief questions? We do need to pass on to Helen, who's got some really exciting updates around soil. But if you have any brief questions, I'd be happy to answer them. No, it's all good. In that case, I'm going to hand over to you, Helen.
Cool. I was going to ask a question, but I couldn't move my mouse quick enough. Firstly, apologies for being late. I was in a school meeting. It's like today, a day of meetings. And also welcome back, Adette. It's lovely to see you again. And pass on my regards to Kate as well, because she was just phenomenal at organising me, basically, for travelling around, collecting all the soil samples. So she's absolutely incredible, and wish her all the best in her next endeavours. I was just going to ask about the phase 2, because a big part of obviously what this initiative is about the student engagement, but I wonder whether there's something as well about feeding some things in terms of teaching, and whether there could be any kind of dissemination in terms of, I don't know how it could work, but either seminar sessions that students could be a part of, because we've got a really active, I'm sure Miranda and Andy will probably say the same about their committees, like the geography committees, of trying to kind of feed this project into university kind of strategies. So I've been talking about this project in the biodiversity committee that we have and the sustainability committee at universities, and they're all really interested in it. But for us, it's hard to know how we can feed it up to the top of the university chain, because we're only, you know, way down the pecking order. But I wonder if SOS UK, given that the power that you guys have because of the status you have, like spreading around all of the universities, whether we can come at it from different agendas that way. Whether, I'm not saying it should be part of the phase 2, but I think that's a really big problem that I'm facing in terms of, and I can see Miranda and Andy nodding as well, as to how we feed a lot of this stuff up to the powers that be that sit in their ivory towers, that say they want to tick all these boxes for sustainability, for climate offsetting. But how can we get a project like this from the bottom up to actually make that impact? And so I think that would be a really big part of how that dissemination package can feed into the university strategies. I don't know how to do that, but at least if it's there, that we can say that we're going to try and do that, and we can maybe feed in SOS UK contacts to our individual sustainability committees of the 3 to 5 farms that are involved in that. That might be quite a useful initiative. In theory.
That sounds really, really good, Helen. Thank you. And I can see Joanna's nodding there and Odette as well. So we will definitely take that back, and feed that into our development plans and discussions. Thank you. It's really, really, really helpful.
Because I think I asked you before about sending the FCN report, because our sustainability and biodiversity team were asking about it, and we're in quite a lucky position at Loughborough that on our biodiversity committee, one of the women that sits on there, she's actually the wife of the Vice Chancellor. So so it does kind of help to get things kind of pushed forward. I'm not saying it should be the way that it works, but you know, whatever we can do to get things to help. But again, if we can kind of promote a lot of this work, because they're like, oh, we want to know more about it. So whether that comes from SOS UK or whether it comes from us that are working within the universities, but it could be that we have like some presentations as part of Sustainability Week, that you guys could come and talk about the projects that's going on, and we can come in and make people sniff soil and things like that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good. I love the sniffing soil. Thank you. I think maybe it might be useful for us to arrange another call to discuss this further, and with Joanna and maybe Jamie in that call as well. But because I need to sort of push you on, I'm afraid, because we've only got about 5 minutes for you to tell us all about great stuff about soil.
Oh, sorry.
But thank you.
Yeah, just a quick update on soils. I don't have any data to show you yet. I've currently got Olivia in the lab who's processing some of the soils as we speak, which is awesome. So we've currently processed 400 soils for soil water content. They've all been dried and sieved. I think I'm still coughing up soil balls from doing that. But we're currently working on the carbon measurements. Like I said, they're literally in the muffle furnaces right now, which is great to have Olivia come back. Some other exciting news. Last week, I found out that we've won probably the equivalent of about £23,000 worth of analytical funding from the British Geological Survey. Well, it's part of NEAF. Everyone loves a good 4-letter N acronym. So it's the NERC Environmental Isotope Facility. So I know a lot of the farmers were talking about asking for elemental carbon and nitrogen, which is part of the new kind of standard methodological approach for getting carbon and nitrogen measurements. But basically I had to blag it, because doing elemental carbon and nitrogen is it's kind of a bog standard measurement for a lot of places, although we don't have the capacity to do that. Well, we have the machine at Loughborough to do it, but we don't have a technician to run it. So with this application, we're also getting additional data sets for looking at stable isotopes. So we're looking at stable carbon and nitrogen isotopes to see if we can get some idea as to how these different ratios and relationships can tell us about soil carbon stability, and how well it stays in the soil, which is obviously part of the problem as to why the carbon credit schemes doesn't work. So whilst they said, the email went to my junk folder, so I didn't see it for like 4 days. But they said they'll partially fund the award. So I didn't know what that meant, because I'd put in for 45K's worth of funding for all 400 samples. So they said they will fund 200. So that will basically be half of what we've got. But because we have 10 samples per hectare, so that was 20 per farm, we'll just do half. So we're going to get a lot of replication. We won't get the full spatial replication, but we will get a lot of replication in terms of how reliable that data will be. So that's really exciting, and that money has to be spent and analysed by the end of March, which coincides with when this project kind of runs out as well. Another bit of positive news is I've also won an internship fund within Loughborough, and we interviewed for the position on Monday. And we had 5 amazing candidates. They were all appointable, but we could only appoint 1. I did ask for 5 interns, but the university said I was only allowed to have 1. It's very selfish of them. But it's for 50 hours. And so we have the student again starting, he can start on the 1st of Feb. So depending on how much Olivia gets done this week, he will either finish off what Olivia's got left to do, or as part of this application for the additional analysis, the British Geological Survey have also said they would like to have student engagement as part of, they really liked that aspect of the project. So whether I get the intern to go and help with BGS, or we can get the intern to kind of help within the labs. But also because you guys at SOS-UK are awesome, there's some money left over from the campaign. So we've also, of the candidates that I interviewed on Monday, I asked them all the question, if you weren't successful with this internship, would you like to still be involved in the project? And they all said yes. But only 1 has actually replied to my email, and he is super keen. He said, I love your enthusiasm for soil. So he would love to come and help out. And he just wants experience doing stuff that he's not as familiar with. So whilst I don't have data, so apologies for that, this semester has just been absolutely horrendous. But we have got a lot of kind of positive stuff kind of coming out from this, which is incredible. And we will get more data from what we said that we would in terms of this kind of stable isotope measurement as well. So hopefully that's not too bad.
This is brilliant, Helen. Like, that's amazing. Thank you so much. And I know Helen's not going to say this, but also congratulations, because in that time you also got a promotion at work. Well,
yay!
Well,
thank you. Super excited.
Yeah, so deserved. Yeah, that's all brilliant news. Thank you. Great. So can we hand over? There'll be an opportunity for questions for both Helen and Celine after Celine's given you an update around the biodiversity. So if we can hand over to you, Celine.
Great. Hi, everyone. Lovely to see, some familiar faces. And I'm just stepping in today for the biodiversity updates because Kate couldn't make today. So I'll do our best to give you a bit of an overview. And if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer. And if anything we're not sure about, I'm sure we can come back to it. So in terms of our surveying, we sort of went through a bit of a process earlier this year of trying to figure out what sort of surveys would first be appropriate for students. So I essentially compiled a long list, which some of you have seen, of various surveys that could be done on farmland to sort of look at various species groups. In the end, from this long list, we sort of chose the ones we felt are best based on habitat indicators in terms of farmland health, based on knowledge level. So was it appropriate for students with, relatively limited knowledge potentially of ID for species? How feasible is it to train within a short session as well? So obviously with only an hour or 2 to do the training, is it actually appropriate? And also things like timings and equipment in terms of times of year that was relevant, and also equipment would be needed. So as an example, things like moth trapping obviously was quite an expensive one, so we decided not to do that one. It's obviously nighttime surveys as well. So as an example of something we didn't do, that's the sort of thing we avoided. In terms of what we did go for, you can see on the screen here, we had a sort of narrowed down list. So for March and April, we went for Earth from Abundance, which was an in-house method. We did farmland bird surveys, so that was based on the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust's big farmland bird count. You might have heard of this before. So sort of based on the methodology, although that's normally done in February, we sort of use some methodology to it. And then we also did an optional survey for some farms if they had the time and capacity to do it, was mammal sightings and signs. So this was using Mammal Society's Mammal Mapper app. So that was the options for students doing the March-April surveys. And then we also had the May and June batch. So this was 2 surveys to be done in sort of the summery months, which was the Great British Hedgerow Surveys, which was based on methodology from the People's Trust for Native Species and was directly uploaded to their site as well. And also flower insect time counts or fit counts. I'm sure lots of you might have heard of them before. This is all looking at pollinators that were sort of in the farms field. So these are the sort of 5 surveys we ended up doing the sort of core training for and had the option for doing. The core ones were the hedgerow, the flower insect time counts, the birds and the earthworms, and mammals are optional, as I said. So that was kind of what we went for in the end. Cool. Cool. So in terms of who actually came along to our sessions, it really depended on the sort of site, to be honest, because we had a bit of a mix of institutions. So for the ones that were college based, it was really great because a lot of the time the lecturer would actually include, potentially their whole sort of cohort of students. So that was super easy, and that was basically the whole class would go out and do it potentially after one of the lessons or during one of the lesson slots. At the universities, it was a little bit trickier because it was a lot of sort of recruitment for students who just generally were interested, so slightly different demographics. But you can see on the screen here, these are all the students that did our baseline survey, so you have a bit of an idea of who actually took part. So around 69% were UK students, so had a fair bit of international students actually, which was great. 70% were female, which again, I think with sustainability tends to happen quite a lot of SOS's work. We always seem to have slightly more women involved than men and other groups. And then we also had 50% around sort of undergraduate levels, so a good mix of postgraduate and other levels as well. So as I said, it really depended on the sort of course type, where it was linked to, where we had postgraduates or A-levels. Yeah, it sort of depended on the staff lead a little bit. But just to give you an idea of who was actually taking part, yeah, summary stats here. In terms of the actual surveys, so we did the training for all the students before they went out on site. So these were done online over several sessions. And before each of those sort of training cohorts, we had a bit of a general introduction for the students to get to know the project, to understand what they were part of, what is farming for carbon nature, essentially, a bit of an intro to what we're actually trying to do. We also gave them a good overview of the topics of farming, climate and nature, and had some general interactive elements to sort of help them understand what the programme was about and get them to sort of baseline knowledge on this sort of topic. So that was the sort of introduction we had for all students beforehand. And this was then followed by a specific training session for each of those surveys that I mentioned earlier. So the birds, the worms, pollinators, hedgerows and mammals. So for each of those, we had a specific sort of training session just to introduce, the actual groups. So we'd talk about the importance of that species group in farmland, why are we actually trying to look for them on the farms, and also looked at actual methodology to teach them how they're going to be going out on field, what they're going to be looking for, how to actually carry out on the day. So that was the sort of summary of what we did in terms of the surveys and the training. And you can see the students generally overall found the experience positive, as you can see. So that was a good sign. Most of them felt they enjoyed it. So yeah, always happy to see that after you deliver the session, of course. Cool. So in terms of staff experience, we tried to also ask the staff how they found working with us, because of course that is equally important, if not even more important in this project, to actually make sure the staff feel supported. So at each of our farm sites, well, at most of them, we had a biodiversity lead who was essentially someone who was based at the university or college, who sort of either volunteered or was sort of wrangled by us to help us out with this project. So essentially that was someone who'd lead on the site and help us recruit the students to actually have those links. I know that in a few sites we struggled a little bit with this element, so I know that Kate ended up being a bit of a biodiversity lead for 2 of our farms, but for the others we had someone from the institution who was our main lead there. And what we did is, after the whole sort of summer of doing the surveys, we then sent a survey to these staff to ask them about their opinions and get a bit of experience from them in terms of what they enjoyed, what they found difficult. So a bit of a summary here. They generally thought the written materials and support provided by us and experience of running the surveys was all positive, so that was really good. The training was rated as being of an appropriate level. We asked them if they thought it was good for the level of students, and we did make a slight tweak for sometimes the college students to make it a bit more, slightly lower down level, just to make sure that information wasn't too over their heads. And the workload was generally rated as expected, which was again positive. We did have one staff member said it was more than expected, so again, something for future that we could look at in terms of how we could support those staff better. But overall, fairly positive experience from the biodiversity leads who did work with us. We also asked during that survey what the sort of main challenges were. So you can see a little sort of bar graph here on the screen, which just tells you a little bit about what the staff actually struggled with. So if it's in orange, that means yes, they had a challenge or problem with it. If it's grey, that means no, they didn't have any problems. And blue means not applicable. So perhaps we were doing it for them, or it wasn't something they had to do on the day. So student recruitment, not surprisingly, I'm sure lots of you have worked with students, was always the biggest challenge, and at some of our sites proved a little bit tricky, especially at times of the year. So for example, I know for the summer surveys, which was sort of May, June time, of course, that's not ideal for students to have exam periods or sort of coming to the end of the year. So that's one of these sort of examples. So student recruitment was probably, I think the biggest challenge overall at some of the sites, unless it was colleges where it was generally easier. Sourcing equipment, generally, Kate, I know, did a lot of the sourcing for the farm. So again, for most places, it wasn't really a problem. Occasionally, we might have a specific thing that perhaps someone had lost, the thought they had on site, but generally, most of the time, not too much of an issue. So hopefully that's something that we managed to smooth out quite well. Sourcing lunch, again, we had lunch for the students on the day, so that was generally either done by us or not really an issue. Arranging transport, again, wasn't an issue, so that's good. The things that were a bit more challenging were all to do generally with all the students, as you can see. So collating recording sheets, materials for use on the field trip. Some of the staff found that a little bit challenging to make sure it's actually all printed, ready to go out. Directing the students actually completing the survey, that was probably the second hardest challenge in terms of actually getting them to do it correctly. Again, something to review, and also supporting the students to actually upload the data. So I know from myself, having gone through all the farms data in the background, we did have a few places that sort of had missing sheets or missing bits. So something to look at for future, how we can really streamline that process and make sure we get all the data from that day, potentially within the training day, I guess, just to make sure we don't lose any of it. So that was a bit of a challenge, actually getting that data uploaded and submitted to us at times. So yeah, a bit of an idea of what the challenges were and what was fine. On the screen here, you've got a pretty little colourful graphic here. So just to show you a bit of an average. So for each of the farms, I've now gone through all the biodiversity data and sort of just created a little average so we can share with the farms so they can see how they compare to the other farms essentially. So for each of our sites, we've got the specific data, but here on the screen, you can see the average incidence of earthworms, the average number of bird species recorded, the average sort of number of insects in each fit count, and also the average hedgerow health score. So this is just for the farms to sort of refer to and see where they sort of rank compared to the averages across all of our farm sites from this project. For the actual specific farms, I've gone onto Canva and created these little graphics, which essentially tell the farm as a short little report, basically, of what has been found on their site. So tried to make it look a bit prettier rather than having lots of text. So there's little pictures and stuff, just so it's not too boring for the managers to actually look at. But essentially, you can see for each of those sections, it shows the number of species recorded relevant. I picked out some of the things like which farm and specialist birds were found, number of incidents of earthworms in different fields, mammal presence, pollinating insect abundance, and hedgerow health. So kind of depending which surveys were done on each farm, they've all got a sort of presented report back to them with this total stats to give them a bit of a summary, a bit of an idea of what was actually found. And where relevant, if it was done on different fields, that comparison is also displayed on this little graphic. So we'll be sending this back to the farms now at the end of the year so they can actually see what was found on their sites. And obviously in future, again, this could be used for more places. So as we get to the end of the year now in terms of our sort of report writing, I know that Kate has been very busy trying to think about all the best things that we can do for future. So after some discussions together and also from just general brainstorming, these are some of the general recommendations we have for future. So if FCN is to continue, hopefully, these are some of the things we'd recommend for the biodiversity aspect. So firstly, we'd suggest creating a biodiversity monitoring group. So potentially having a group of students that actually almost functions a bit like a club or society that over the whole year can sort of do that those field trips as a group and potentially do one survey per field trip day. Ideally, we did find it was a bit challenging. I know the working group did flag this to us as well, that trying to do 2 or 3 surveys in a day is quite tricky when you've got lots of students that are doing it the very first time. So ideally in future, it could be a case of having 1 survey per field trip day if that was possible. Secondly, recruiting the biodiversity staff leads earlier. This was definitely something, as I said, that was a bit of a challenge, and Kate had to step in occasionally to do some of those tasks. So ideally, having that person recruited earlier in the year, making sure they're actually on board of the programme before the academic year starts would be really good. So they're sort of fully up to speed, fully ready to go for the year. We're not having to chase them up, in sort of January, February time. So ideally getting them sort of on board earlier would be good. Thirdly is introductory training again in the autumn term. So if we were to have a sort of core student group idea, if that was to function at some places, maybe we could start with some introductory training in autumn just to get the students sort of inducted, have that sort of general what is FCN, what is the point of the programme in autumn. And they could actually start with the hedgerow health surveys because these can be done in the autumn winter periods. So that could be a nice sort of small, quite easy survey to do before Christmas break for future. Another suggestion was to remove budget for food and allocate this to travel. So if we were to do more field trips, on different days, ideally we'd have more budget for the travel, of course, and not necessarily need to have lunch as well then. Other 2 ones were to link the curriculum as much as possible. So we did our best to do this where we could, but as obviously we're kind of continuing to do that in future, it'd be really nice to have, where possible, more embedding in courses because that made it so much easier to actually get the students out on site where it was already embedded in the sort of lecturers teaching. So definitely continue to do that and actually trying to increase that in future would be good. And finally, potentially pre-recorded training. We had to do a lot of separate training sessions for different sites, which obviously is quite a lot of time. So potentially doing a pre-recorded one with someone on hand to answer questions, that could be an option. Or it could even be done, as a recording they could play in the morning, and then they can actually go out in the afternoon and do the surveys as and when they wish to. So a few ideas there of general logistics of what can be improved. In terms of survey-specific feedback from us, data submission, I think I mentioned this briefly with the staff. definitely in future it'd be good to actually have this incorporated into the actual day. So it's part of that day the students go out, they then come back and do that sort of survey data submission straight away, because it was quite a challenge sometimes logistically to get the survey data back when we're chasing a week or two later. So I think definitely having that in the same day would be really good where possible. So sort of building that time in. For birds, potentially trying to conduct the surveys in February would be good, because we can actually tie in directly with that Game and Wildlife Trust farmland bird count, because that's the specific time of year for it. So again, that could be good, especially for more skilled students to actually take part in that if they've got a good level of bird species ID. For mammals, our discussion was around potentially using footprint tunnels. So obviously doing mammal mapper app is great, and obviously it's good for little tracks and signs, but for sort of long-term abundance and knowing what's actually on site, doing something like footprint tunnels is definitely better. So again, that could be an option for farms in future to do that if they could. And for pollinators, the idea was potentially to conduct a few more of those POM fit counts. They're quite good, short, snappy surveys. I don't know how many of you have actually done them before, but they're generally 10-minute counts. They're quite quick and quite good to do. So potentially doing them a few times over summer would actually give you a better idea of which species are around, because obviously the species insects will change over different months of the summer term. So again, a few ideas there of what could be improved. Cool, and I think our very final slide for me was just about the timeline for future. So looking at how we can actually make sure that we sort of fit in the academic year very neatly and get everything done and dusted by the end. So ideally autumn term, as we said before, could be recruiting the students, having the biodiversity lead already in place for that point, recruiting the students and delivering some general introductory training at this point, potentially having the rapid hedgerow assessment at that stage as well. Then spring and summer, there we go. Spring and summer terms could be bird surveys, so that would be hopefully January, February to tie into that timing. Earthworm surveys in March and April. Mammals in April and May, hedgerows in May, June, and then pollinators hopefully a few times over June, or potentially over June and July if that was possible. So again, trying to sort of spread them out a bit more, I guess, rather than having them bunched up into those months would be really good. So the students have a continuous thing they can take part in, but it's also not quite so intense from our side in terms of data. So yeah, lots of good reasons for doing it a bit more spread out and having that regular interaction with students if that was possible at those places. So now that was a whistle-stop tour from Biodiversity. Is there any questions that I can try and answer on those ones?
Sorry, Celine, can I just jump in? Thank you so much for that. That was really helpful. We've got a break scheduled for 3:55. So if anybody has any questions, either for Celine or for Helen, if we can have brief questions and brief answers, that'd be much appreciated. I don't want to put you off asking questions.
Hopefully it was all super clear, which I'll take as a good thing. But yeah, if you do have any follow-ups, definitely let me know. Yeah, overall it went really well. I think it was a good experience. It's just thinking about how we can align better to the academic year, support the staff more. That was really the main things that came out of this, I think. But yeah, overall students are starting to enjoy it, so that's good. Alan, I can see you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Celine, whether you've got a list of the universities, colleges which took place. Is it a long list, or can you tell us who actually engaged in the end?
Yep, so it would be the same as the soil sampling, I believe, Tilly, wouldn't it? It would be the same, all the sites that we had for soil sampling. So from memory, Bishop, Burton, Bristol, Hartbury, Northumberland, Newcastle, Bristol, Lincoln, test my knowledge now. I think that was, anyway, have I missed any, Tilly? I'm trying to think who else I've missed.
I think
Did you actually manage to get Loughborough?
Oh, Loughborough, apologies.
All right. But I don't know if that was done for biodiversity.
Actually, no, for biodiversity, no, it wasn't done. So no, that was just for the soil, I think. So yeah, for these ones we had, I don't have a list to hand right now, but I'm sure I can find it. 1 second.
I think you did get them all. I've got a list here.
Cool.
I think it was Lincoln you might have missed.
Oh, is that the one? I was trying to look through the list and see, yeah, they opened that. So it's Hartbury, Oxford, FAI, Oxford.
Oh, FAI, Oxford, I missed, yeah.
RBC, Newcastle University, Bristol University, Lincoln University, Bishop Burton College, Northumberland College.
Yeah, and across those, just so you know, we had a bit of a mix of, they didn't all complete all those core surveys. We had 1 or 2 issues where some of them completed one of them and not the other one, so it kind of depended on time and capacity, but they all completed at least some of those biodiversity. So a few of them completed all of them. So again, in future, I think it's just a timing issue that was a bit hard for some of them, that it sort of got to the end of the year and they were sort of struggling to recruit students. So yeah, hence why our recommendation for future would be to try and start a bit earlier in the year, but sort of have those spaced out surveys that are a bit more regular and a bit less of a long day trying to do 2 or 3 things at one day.
So I guess my follow-up would be, are we able to see all of the university colleges, and the information, especially the infographics. That's quite good, but it'd be nice to see a spread across the country as well if we're able to see that information ourselves.
Yeah, I'm just finalising those graphics, so from my perspective, happy to share them with the group. Tilly, if that's fine, and the debt.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it'd be really nice to be able to share them with everybody. Yeah.
And they're going to be shared with all the farms as well, just so they can actually see, yes, or compare to each other as well. Yeah, sorry, go for it.
I was going to say, I think, like, I echo that with some of the problems and challenges with the timings, because I think frustratingly what works during term time then doesn't work necessarily for staff time, because whilst the students might be available in term time, we aren't. So I know from the soils perspective, you know, and this is something, you know, looking ahead, if we want the students to do it within term time, then it also has to coincide with when we're free. So because I know we had a problem with recruitment. We had a really good the students that did kind of come and help on the campaigns were absolutely incredible. And you know, and the fact that I've still got some of them wanting to come and help in the labs now is just a testament to their kind of level of interest. And I don't know how we kind of get around that recruitment, but I think if we could, probably going back to my first point of trying to kind of feed some of the recruitment campaigns into existing kind of societies within the universities, might be a way to try and get more student engagement. Because when I've mentioned it to some of my students that I teach, they're like, oh, I didn't know about it. And you're like, well, do you not read your emails? So I don't know where they're actually finding their information, and it might be that emails isn't the right platform, because we just in a school meeting earlier, and one of the our geography rep was saying, oh, they post a load of stuff more on kind of Instagram and TikTok, and so it might be finding other ways to actually engage more kind of students, because I mean we all get lost in the ever or never ending email lists and threads and stuff. So whether that's something to kind of look at kind of going forward as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely used social media for our recruitment for student engagement a lot. I'd say that's probably our main route. Joanna got a question, and
yes, quite a short question. You know, when you were presenting your demographics, first of all, yeah, just going back, thanks for the presentation, Helen and Celine. They were really great and really informative, so thank you for that. Do you have any certain questions? Do you have any data on student backgrounds? Because you know we try and do quite a lot around inclusion, you know, in SOS-UK, and as we know, the farm sector is very undiverse in terms of race. So did you capture any of that data, or did you just do international versus home? There was a very big mix actually when I saw something with Helen, which was really great to see. So yes, wondering, do we capture any of that in surveys?
I can probably answer that best for you, Joanna. That we did, and that'll come under the student surveys that we did before the baseline and follow-up surveys. We did them before they did the biodiversity monitoring and the soil sampling, and Rachel will be presenting on that after the break. So yeah, that includes we got that data then.
That's why I missed out my bit, Joanna, because Rachel will be covering it in the next part. Cool. And then I think Miranda, have you got a question as well?
Yeah, hello. Just a quick question. Will the students be getting a report as well to see, like maybe on the farms that they were working on, what the final results were? Is there a way to share the results with them as well?
I guess if we send it back to, well, plan to send back all the data to the leads. So I guess it could be a case of just putting in there. I don't think we have the emails for all the students, but we do have for the ones who did the surveys, like on the baseline surveys. So I don't know, haven't thought about that actually. That could be nice for them to actually see what they took part in. Yeah.
Yeah, or at least even with you know, you've got the infographics with what the farmer gets, just something something like that. Just I think something to give back to them would be nice.
That's good. So yeah, I think when I email back the leads, it could be a case of saying, please share with your students, and for the ones that we potentially know who the students were for that specific survey, I guess that we can share that directly. But yeah, good idea actually. It'd be nice to see what they contributed to.
Thank you, Celine, for saying you put it on there. That's a great idea. I think, yeah, great suggestion, Miranda. That's really good. Fantastic. I'm going to suggest that we take a 5-minute break now and come back at 4 o'clock, where Rachel will be able to give us an update on the student the impact on the students for getting involved with the soil and biodiversity. See you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I'm going to drop off now, but lovely to see you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dean. Cheers. Bye.
You're welcome. Bye.
Hello.
Hi, Rachel. How you doing?
I'm all right. How are you?
Good, thank you. We've just coming back from a 5-minute break. So if you wondered why you came and we're all just quiet and not talking to each other. It looks like everybody's Is everybody's back now? I've just noticed, Helen, your Christmas jumper. That's pretty cool.
We were supposed to have a Christmas quiz this afternoon, but I'm missing it to join you guys.
Aww, that's dedication.
But I've also got festive leggings on. I know you all like my leggings, so I've got some penguins on them.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I don't just normally wear stuff like this. It was because the quiz was on. But like, I can't be there in person, but I'll be there in spirit.
Oh, thank you for joining us. We do appreciate your
I'm crap at quizzes anyway. Don't like doing it unless I can win.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Great. Thank you all coming back as a brief break. I'm going to hand straight over to Rachel to talk about student volunteer outcomes and experiences. And I think I said at the beginning, Rachel's heads up our impact team at SOS-UK. So
Rachel,
thank you very much, Rachel.
Would you like me to be your slide mover, or would you like to show your own screen?
I'm happy for you to be my slide mover, Ada. Thank you.
We can do the old ding, please turn the page. So.
Cool. Yeah, so as Tilly said, I'm just going to talk through some of the research we did with the students who volunteered to take part in the programme. We took a baseline and follow-up approach. So we asked students to complete a survey before and after their participation. And across the two different types of experience, so biodiversity and soil sampling, we had 165 students complete the baseline and 90 completed the follow-up. So we looked at any significant differences between baseline and follow-up, and those are reported in the next few slides by these nice colourful arrows. So green is where we saw an increase, grey is where there was no change, and red is where there was a decrease between the two samples. So one of the topics we included in the survey was their understanding of climate change and how it relates to a variety of different contexts. So I won't read out all the numbers on the slide, but you can see that for all of the different aspects we measured, there was a significant increase amongst the students that answered both surveys. So that includes things around understanding how climate change affects their local environment and community, how it affects things at a global scale, the impact and actions they can take on addressing climate change, the motivation they have to do those kind of personal day-to-day life changes, and also kind of the more substantial things like volunteering, joining a group, or signing a petition. So all of those things saw a change before and after participation. Looking at their understanding of things specific to farming for carbon and nature experience, we looked at their understanding of biodiversity and soil. So again, these are all things that we saw an increase in. So the proportion of students saying that they know a lot about biodiversity decline and how it affects their local environment and community increased as a result of their participation. The proportion saying that they know a lot about biodiversity, that's the same thing. Sorry, no, there's a global scale at the end. Sorry, I just started reading the sentence and I was like, I'm saying the same thing that I've already said. So yeah, a global scale as well as a local scale also saw an increase. And again, a motivation to take action to help biodiversity, to address biodiversity decline, also increased in the follow-up survey. We did ask the same, intend to ask the same three indicators for the soils, but fortunately there was a bit of a routing error in the baseline survey, so we only have baseline and follow-up for this one indicator. We do actually have the kind of follow-up data for all three, but just this one has both baseline and follow-up. But you can see that in relation to biodiversity, there was much lower starting point for soil, but it still saw an increase between baseline and follow-up, linked to kind of their general understanding. So the next set of questions was related to their understanding of farming and the connection to climate change and biodiversity decline. So this is where we started to see not such a significant change in understanding between baseline and follow-up. So understanding of the connections between farming and climate change was relatively high at baseline, but did change, but not on a significant basis at follow-up. Similarly, the understanding between farming and biodiversity decline did increase, but not on a significant basis. When we're looking at, when we're looking at how farming can be part of the solution to climate change, this is where we did see a significant increase in their understanding pre and post participation. And similarly with how farming can be a solution to biodiversity decline, whilst there was an increase, that also was not on a significant basis. Next slide. So the experiencing the countryside, I think this is the last kind of group of questions that we had on in terms of the quantitative measures that we looked at. And again, this was kind of a set where there weren't that many changes, and also not on a significant level. So perceptions of kind of enjoyment of the countryside to get a break from study and work remained fairly similar. Their kind of levels of appreciation of being in the countryside and concern about what they kind of see when they visit the countryside in terms of the damage to wild plants and animals remained relatively static. There was a increase in the proportion of students saying that spending time in the countryside is important for their well-being, but not on a significant level. And also the same for feeling like they belong in the countryside. So we also asked them some questions related to their motivations for getting involved and the extent to which those motivations were fulfilled. And then we also asked some open-ended questions around their kind of general feedback and experiences of being part of the project. So you can see in the kind of top half of this slide, on the left-hand side, there's the top 3 motivations for getting involved, and these were developing or gaining practical skills and experience related to sustainability and the climate and biodiversity crises, to increase their knowledge in these areas and to gain specific skills or knowledge or experience that could be applied to their projects or their coursework. And then you can see that on the right-hand side, the top 2 skills that they named as being fulfilled by experience what remain the same in relation to their motivations, but the third most commonly reported aspect that was fulfilled by the experience was the kind of sense that they were contributing to an important cause. Whilst it was a kind of motivation for getting involved, you can see kind of like the shift up the agenda in terms of the fulfillment side of things for that aspect. And then finally, kind of the best things about the Farming for Carbon and Nature experience. This sentence at the top is just a summary of all the different types of things that were mentioned in these open-ended questions. So things like knowledge and skills, the chance to get a practical experience, meeting like-minded people, an opportunity to be outside, and also the chance to take positive action on climate change. And in the boxes below in pink are just a couple of quotes from the students that completed the surveys. And over on the right-hand side, there are some suggestions on how the experience could be improved. So some of generally, I would say that there weren't that many suggestions here. There was a lot of people just saying they couldn't possibly think of anything else to improve the experience because they'd had such a great time. But those that did have some suggestions, these related to ideas for collaboration with other organisations that are working in this area, so they can kind of expand further their understanding of what's going on and how different organisations are working on the same issues. Some people wanted it to be a longer experience, being able to spend more time on the farms they visited, or kind of expanding into lab work, and I think that was a suggestion that was then picked up. and embedded into the project, and some more time and to liaise and understand kind of the individual farms that they visited was also a suggestion. And then I think what was my favourite feedback comment ever in all of the surveys that we do, somebody asked for some more worms because there weren't enough worms when he was doing a survey. So yeah, Tilly, that's something to bear in mind for future projects, just get more worms. I think maybe that's all of the slides that we have. Yes.
Does anybody have any questions for Rachel? Actually, can I just ask it, but just jump in there with a question, because Joanna asked before about collecting diversity data on the student participants. I think that was part of the baseline and follow-up, but I don't know if you...
Yeah, let me see. I don't think we put it into this presentation that we have, but I can check, we can include it in the final thing that we submit, because yeah, we ask the standard demographics that we ask.
Cool, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions for Rachel? Alan?
In the absence of no one else saying anything, yeah, I'd like to mirror from the earlier sort of conversation with Helen about how we raise the profile of what we're trying to research, because I think there's a group of students who don't know what they don't know, and therefore, you know, how do we actually engage those people who really should be engaged in wildlife? So I know from the surveys, we were starting at a high point. People who are interested in the countryside, you know, obviously didn't learn a great deal more because they're interested anyway. But actually, what we need to do is capture students who aren't engaged and sort of explain the significance of farming in this case for that. So it's not a question really, it's more a case of, you know, well, that's the question, you know, how do we collectively take this one forward, identify the significance of this research to the universities, and therefore, you know, make this part of the mainstream education as opposed to, you know, just a general interest.
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking while you were talking, like some of the more general kind of guidance that exists around communicating climate change could be quite useful to consider. So a lot of the time recommendations are to kind of not necessarily frame it as a link to climate change or link to farming, or so I think maybe that's something, if we're trying to encourage a wider range of students to participate in experiences like that, we could review the kind of promotional materials that we use and see if there's any way that, other than the kind of directly saying this is a chance to go to a farm, we could frame those opportunities so that we are potentially appealing to different types of students who might not see that as something that they kind of is applicable to them.
Thank you, Rachel. Helen?
Yeah, it was just to kind of follow up on that point, because one of the things that I noticed, especially from the soils side of things, is those universities that have farmland, the lack of engagement with the students and the farmers, and actually that awareness that the universities even have a farm was pretty shocking. And especially when some of the students were studying, I think it was mostly at Bristol, maybe, some of the students were studying sustainable food management or sustainable food production, and not a single one had ever been onto the farm, and like they're growing wheat, and that just shocked me. And they're like, oh yeah, we've got no idea. I mean, it's the same at Loughborough, and I think the only farm that was more engaged with the students was probably Newcastle. No, James is here. And the students there seem to be doing more work with the farmers, and even FAI and their farm was incredible in terms of the work that they're doing. But again, now Oxford are kind of, wanting to kind of get the students involved more, but I think it's other universities that or other groups of colleges and high schools that take their students to FAI Farm to show them what good work they're doing. But I think this is where I think we're in a really unique position here of how we can get the universities to take a stance. And I know at Loughborough there's a lot of contention between the farmers and the relationships between the farmers and the universities, because he's a tenant farmer and all of the land that Loughborough has, including this farmland, has already been accounted for in terms of development. And when I've been talking to the arborist on campus, he gets very frustrated with that because he's charged with or tasked with, where can we plant trees? And he was like, here. And they're like, no, you can't, that's going to be developed. Okay, here, no, that's going to be developed. So there's a much bigger kind of agenda here from a university's perspective, that the farmlands that universities have is not just a land asset. And that's why if we can try and get some monetary kind of value to it, then that's what universities are going to listen to. We did have a visit from Steve Varley, who's the CEO of Ernst & Young, who's our new university ambassador for climate change and sustainability. And so I got him to sniff some soil. And whilst he was kind of coming around, a big part of what he's interested in, again, is the carbon credits from a finance side of things, but it is the student engagement. And he didn't have the answers as to how we can get more, but the student voice is massive. And I keep telling our students that if they shout loud enough, they'll listen. We don't have a loud voice as staff, but the students do. So I think there's quite a lot of ways, if we can try and kind of get this up the agenda, especially those universities that have farmland, to actually value it for the farmland itself and the actual value that brings, not just as a monetary asset. And again, it's more just a comment just to kind of follow up from what Alan just said. I think there's a lot more that we can build on here, and I think this is a really cool project to feed into that baseline and actually kind of get some action.
Thank you, Helen. Yeah, that's really interesting. So actually, there wasn't a question in that for Rachel, was there? Or was your comment? That was really good.
Ranting again.
No, it's all really interesting. It's all really good. I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't. Andy, and then James got a question.
Yeah, in a way, this is an impossible question, so apologies for this, Rachel. But I almost asking the people that came. It's almost like, is there a way of finding out why, or like what the barriers might be to people not engaging or not coming along? Like either from the people that came, you know, they might have friends that couldn't come for various reasons, or asking people on courses that maybe didn't sign up, even just informally, you know, whatever, because obviously they're not going to fill in a survey about something they didn't do, but yeah, just an idea.
Yeah, I guess if it's connected to particular, if people in this group have connections to particular courses that were used to recruit students, that would be something that we could look into and understand why people haven't signed up. I guess some of the kind of wider bits of research that exist on kind of participation in like extracurricular activities might be quite useful to bear in mind, like the fact that, I don't know, people have part-time jobs and family commitments and things like that. So things out of like their core course hours are quite limited when you're in those situations. So I guess that also comes back to Alan's original point about how we increase participation, is like thinking about different kinds of opportunities that will appeal to different types of students and the different kind of requirements they have for participation. Would be quite a useful exercise as well, I guess. Just related to Helen's point, I have actually just put a link to some wider research that we did on student opinion on access to nature, particularly within education. So we asked students what they whether they agreed with statements like whether their university or college should provide opportunities for students to experience nature, or on whether they should take action to protect and support nature on their grounds or on other land that they own. So some of those findings might be quite useful in conversations that you're having. And that's from kind of a national survey with almost 3,000 students across the UK.
Thank you for sharing that, Rachel. That's, yeah, very relevant. James, you got a question?
It's probably more of a comment based on raising awareness that I'm pleased that we were flagged as our students being the most aware, but I would say that probably less than 5% of the staff know that we have a farm, and probably less than 10% of the students have a farm, and that is with, you know, we have open days, we have coffee mornings, we go around and have harvest festivals, and that is push, 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 push. And when you think about the farms, you know, our £2 million turnover in the university, £600 million turnover, we're less than 1%. And Alan will have the same at Bristol. We are less than 1%. And it's really hard when there's other things going on that are a bigger proportion of the student activities to gain that recognition across the farms of being important. And, you know, the level of awareness that we've got is a lot of people with a lot of work, and it's not easy. And simply, you know, if you just rank it in terms of turnover, that's how important we are in the university. And in the bigger universities that have lots of things going on, you know, Newcastle, Bristol will be some of those. It is really hard to raise awareness. You know, you keep trying, and we won't stop. But you know, this has been a sort of 5-year program to where we are at the moment to get to the level where we are at Newcastle, and we're nowhere near. I don't even think we're at over 10% in terms of awareness, and that is with a lot of hard work and effort. So I think we've got to sit here and be realistic with what we can do, and also be realistic with where the importance is. But I think Helen mentioned it. You need to know the right people to get up to the top, and that's our better way of getting the impact you need. The other thing that we're going to start trading on, and again Bristol will do that, and this will have value for the universities, not just terms and development, but as soon as they start having to pay for biodiversity net gain and nutrient neutrality, the land becomes really, really important. Probably has more value than development land, and that will be a big shift. And so you probably want to go at it by 2 or 3 fronts. But it's not an easy task, and we've been doing it for a long time, and we're nowhere near coverage. And I don't think we'll ever hit more than 25% of people who know that we have a farm at Newcastle, despite all the work we're doing. And I don't think we're going to beat ourselves up about it if that's the maximum we can get to.
Thank you, James. That's really insightful. Really interesting. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that. We've just got a couple of minutes before I'm going to hand over to Liz. Alan.
Yeah, bound to be me again. No, I'm just reiterating what James said, so won't be any surprise. I must admit, I'm sort of sitting on my hands about biodiversity net gain. We've also got regenerative farming. There's some quite low-lying fruit on this. Green infrastructure and university sort of reputational messages to be put out there. This is almost like marketing, and I'm sort of biding my time to have the perfect time, and maybe that won't come. Plus, what we're talking to sustainability now about is the sequestered carbon, and now that Natural England have published a review of how much carbon each habitat, everything's starting to align with biodiversity net gain, sustainable farming initiative, etc., and I think it's now good to have this information being released, because it is another driver. So I need to find the energy to launch again and sort of go back to the university and say, look, this is significant. It's small contributions, but it's a contribution to the bigger picture, and this is university reputation now.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. John, do you want to?
Thank you. There's 2 or 3 things that fall out of it for me. When you're talking about the talking to students, I think sometimes counterintuitive marketing can work. I know somebody put on a course called Astronomy for Poets once, So actually encouraging people to acknowledging that people might not see themselves through the lens of people who would enjoy these kind of activities, and nevertheless encouraging them to do so would be good. And I think there's a probably a soft but significant well-being aspect in this as well. So talking to student life officers and the like, and encouraging people to take part in this kind of activity, which has got elements of all the good things that we've heard about from the people who've worked together on this, in terms of making friends potentially and just being outside. The other thing is, I was thinking, Alan, that's really interesting about sequestration in habitats. I read a very good book recently from France that they were talking about targets they've got around zero soil artificialization and what it might mean to protect soils, and whether that comes to us. I think we're a few years behind France in some of these things, and the stopping of urban sprawl and the maintenance of the health of soil being important to them. Anyway, 3 random things. There you go.
Thank you, John. That's really interesting, really useful comments from everybody. I really appreciate that. And I think your mention around carbon and farming is a very nice transition for me to hand over to Liz from Farm Carbon Toolkit to talk about her the research that they've been doing as part of our NERF funded project and the report that they've written. If I could hand over to you, Liz, please.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Tilly, and afternoon, everybody. I've got a few slides, so hopefully I'll better share them with you. Let's see what happens. Oh, choose what you want to share. Let's see what it's going to ask me. Should be it. Can everybody see my screen now? It's coming, it might come slowly. It says I'm sharing, but...
Yeah, can see your screen.
Perfect. Okay, so we had a small role in this project right from the start, and then back in the summer we were talking with Kate Winters about the piece of work that needed to be done with this project, which was all about trying to identify what financial support farmers, or rather tenants of university colleges, might require in order to be tempted to take on regenerative farming practices. So this is what we've really set about doing. And I should say that my background is as an agricultural advisor. I worked for ADAS for 20 years, actually, a long time. And then as a business management advisor for much of that. So foolishly, I said to Kate that potentially we could actually look at partial budgets for adopting some of these practices, but I'll take you through all the work that we did. So this was our objective. It was to better understand the financial support that universities could provide to agricultural operations to facilitate the transition to, it says agroecological farming, more regenerative farming methods, whatever you want to call it, as part of that process of achieving net zero or better on farms. So that was what we set out to do. And this is how we did it. So we started by doing a literature review with Kate to compile that evidence base. And then at number 2, yeah, that was number 1. So we were kind of looking to see what information was out there. And I'll go through some of that in a minute. It was looking for credible regenerative farming practices, data on the carbon impact of these practices, and then data on the financial impact of these practices. And luckily enough, compared to when the other research papers were written, which was before clear information on SFI and countryside stewardship options was available, I also researched the kind of financial support available that could support more regenerative farming practices. And then the second thing we did was to use data from our Farm Carbon Calculator because we've now got over 8,000 users. So there's a wealth of data on our calculator, and we have enough information about the farms to be able to compile case study models. And we've done that for these 4 different farm types. And then we look to see more regenerative farms businesses of those types and have compared those to more mainstream business types. And then the third element, which probably has been the most tricky one, was for all the regenerative farming practices that we identified, it was to work through a partial budget for the financial impact on farm businesses of adopting those practices. I've done it on an annual basis, and I've also really got a number of practicing farmers to look at the data or look at the budgets to say, you know, to really check them off in the real world. And then the final section is obviously what we're doing right now, which is presenting some of these findings to you. So this is the list that, after much discussion, toing and froing, I've ended up with as a list of what I would consider to be more regenerative farming practices. And the ticks indicates the farm types that I would suggest that they are most applicable to. And all the way through the rest of the work, I've been looking at those practices. So, you know, as I go on through, and this is by no means exhaustive, but if you kind of think about the types of things that farmers who are trying to carry out practices which support soil health, they tend to be these kind of things. Okay, now this next one, what I wanted to really show you here is that and this has been one of the sort of big Achilles, and it still remains the Achilles heel of this whole area of what are the impacts of regenerative farming practices, is the scarcity of credible evidence. So this particular little table comes from this document, Functional Agrobiodiversity, an Evaluation of Current Approaches and Outcomes, which actually is hot off the presses. It was only published in Land this autumn. I happen to know about it because I'm one of the authors, along with CEH et al. And what it's doing is the size of the star indicates the strength of evidence that's available for these practices. And I think that it's really important, you know, for some practices, either there's no evidence, which is NE, or in some cases that evidence is pretty weak. The great big black stars have got much stronger evidence. So you can see, for instance, that the areas which have got the most stars are generally, you've got soil quality, actually water quality's got similar number, but the one where we have really so little information is yield. That's probably the biggest one, and clearly that has the biggest impact on financial impact of adopting these practices. And that really is an area where there is really little credible evidence. Most of the information, and indeed the information I had to rely on, was anecdotal, coming from those farmers who've been practicing some of these practices for a number of years. And the second one here, again coming from that same publication, is that these measures, their contributions to ecosystem service provision and farm management. And again, all these findings are based on the same research reports that were investigated. It's almost like a sort of a meta study of a whole load of research reports. And you can see there's some soil quality responds pretty well to most of these measures. And I should say the term FAB, just so that you know, means functional agrobiodiversity, and it's a term that was coined by an Interreg project in which I was involved, along with CEH and National Trust and Soil Association from the UK, as well as 12 partners from across Northwest Europe. And I think this is very helpful, because this really is the first time that anybody has attempted to show this kind of information in this kind of way. And what it also does is show you, for instance, where it says red, this is suggesting that some of these practices could well have a negative impact. And the amber is really where people aren't quite sure, or where it can go both ways. But again, I think this is quite a helpful document in improving our understanding of the contributions of these regenerative farming practices on ecosystem service provision. Now, the next one I want to show you is talking about the level of carbon sequestration or carbon emissions reduction that is possible from some what I would term as more regenerative farming practices. I haven't actually put the source of this, but this comes from a Green Alliance report that was published in January 2022 for some work that was funded by WWF, looking in really to the potential for carbon storage on farm and also sort of ownership of carbon within the voluntary carbon market. But what I want to draw your attention to here really is that some of the more typical practices that are cited as being part of more regenerative farming systems, i.e. no-till systems, or indeed incorporating more organic matter, you can see that the level of carbon dioxide equivalent, CO2es, that are typically sequestered are relatively low and quite variable as well. And I think that that's one of the challenges at the moment. And certainly that's something I think that needs to be borne in mind in terms of thinking of the carbon impact of some of these practices. For the ones at the top of the table, the asterisk, my apologies, I should have put what that meant. That is talking about reduction in emissions rather than sequestration. And you can see that paludiculture, which effectively is wetland farming, would have a significant impact on reducing emissions from peatland. And that's something that potentially, you know, clearly that's being talked about at the moment, as well as halving the drainage depths for arable on peat. And that seems to be something that potentially could be useful to do. So that was sort of part of setting the scene in terms of what's already out there. And then the next thing was to look at the farm type models that we generated from our calculator data. And I've just given one example here. Within the dairy sector, we were able to pull out a more intensive dairy model, a more regenerative dairy model, which was relying more on milk from forage, and was also had a reduced reliance on fertilizer, and then an organic model which had got obviously used no fertilizer and produced even more milk from forage with lower yielding cows and hence lower usage of concentrate in total. And what you can see here in the numbers below are pulled directly from our carbon calculator. And the bit that's probably a bit misleading is the tons of carbon sequestration. Partly the organic dairy farm is much larger, so it's got a greater opportunity for sequestration. But I should say that that sequestration that's shown is all based on actual data that the farmers have submitted into the calculator. There's no modelling there. And if the farm has a greater area of woodland or longer kilometres of hedges that are left to grow tall, as well as having recorded soil analysis data with organic matter information, that will be reflected in the sequestration figure, as will actually when they tell us about countryside stewardship options, because again, as somebody referred to earlier, we have access to information on likely sequestration levels from some prescriptions, for instance, GS2, there'll be a number associated with that. If a farmer tells us they've got a number of hectares in GS2, we'll assign a value to it. But what you can see, and given sort of the total farm carbon balance is affected by the amount of sequestration. So the calculator works, it adds up all the emissions and takes away the sequestration to give the farm a balance. But what is interesting is the carbon balance per kilogram of FPCM, which is fat and protein corrected milk. They're all much the same, although the carbon balance per hectare goes down as really the extensivity, if you like, of farming goes up. But again, what that's, in a way, what this is showing you is as we, or indeed other calculators, have a better database, our ability to be able to benchmark different farm types is getting better all the time. And it's also then possible to draw out really some helpful information from those analyses. And certainly it is possible through adopting some regenerative farming practices to reduce greenhouse gas emissions at a farm level. And then I'll just take you through 2 of the partial budgets that I've produced. And I'm very conscious that I've got James sitting in the audience, and James also used to work for ADS, so yet another person to look at the budgets and cast a beady eye over them. So what I did was I used John Nix, I used Farm Business Survey, RB209, King's Hay, as well as talking to farmers who are practicing some of these practices. And as I say, all the budgets have been reviewed by 2 experienced farmers. And the list on the right-hand side is practices that I've attempted to develop a partial budget for in this report that we've produced for SCN. I'll just take you through. So for all these practices, these are the practices, and the dots, this is very brave of me. If it's got a green dot, I've assessed that there is potentially a positive impact on profit, but that impact does include a funding coming in from either Countryside Stewardship or SFI if there is a relevant funding available. And the orange dots basically suggesting there's really no impact on profit. And the purple one, and it's purple, not red, because one of my reviewers pointed out that he was red-green colourblind. So the purple dots indicate where, from my assessment, there is a negative impact on profit. And I should say that from having been a farm business advisor for many years, all of these have to be taken with a pinch of salt, and they do depend where you're starting from. And I would say within all the partial budgets, the difficult element is to know how pessimistic to be in terms, for some of them anyway, in terms of likely reduction in yield. And I've taken those yield reduction levels from anecdotal evidence from practicing farmers. Having said that, those practicing farmers tend to be pretty technically good, and they want to make it succeed. So they will work really hard to make it succeed, which would not necessarily be the case if more mainstream farmers were to adopt these practices. Okay, so then I'll just very quickly go through 2 of these budgets. So I did one for the introduction of cover crops, and you can see that I put SFI support at the top. It could have been water company support from the likes of Entrade or whoever, but basically it's coming up, I would say, with a fair wind behind it. And if you don't lose yield as a result of growing a cover crop, chances are you'll basically just about break even. Obviously, in addition to that, you should get some soil health benefits. You should also reduce pollution through reduced loss of nitrogen from the soil. Then these are the sort of contexts that I, again, for each of these budgets within the report, I've added in these comments just to help anybody reading it to understand kind of the thought processes I've gone through and what I've included and what I haven't included. I'm not going to go through these as an example, it's just to show you what's included in the report. The second example I've chosen to include here is this idea of holistic grazing, mob grazing. I combined it with extended grazing, i.e. keeping livestock out for a longer period. In this case, it was an extra 50 days out at grass, I think. And it's quite interesting because the majority of the benefits that you get from mob grazing really result from reduced costs associated with livestock housing. Other benefits are very much anecdotal and are very hard currently to be able to define accurately. I've added some increased costs in terms of investment in the kit, which is not inconsiderable, and had great conversations with one of my farmers about whether it took more time or not to be having to set up all the grazing cells. I've ended up leaving something in there, but you can see there is a benefit on that basis. And again, what the benefits I haven't included are those for soil and biodiversity. I've put in something for animal health because generally there's a view that there is a reduction in the requirement for anthelmintics. And again, the more comments there added in terms of, And the main reason for mob grazing is to do with soil health, which clearly feeds into the regenerative principles. And then finally, I've really stuck my neck out and put in some conclusions and recommendations for FCN. And the first one, I mean, I've already said it, the volume of robust evidence is pretty low, but it is growing. Really is required, because I've heard it so many times, especially from large farming operators, that before they can really go for a regenerative farming, they need to know clearly what the impacts are, because they have to sell it to the landowners. And in that regard, to a degree, universities are no different. So that research would really help. I think there is research going on. And Kate's suggestion was we can compile the list of that research, but I suspect there's still gaps. And this other one, which I feel very strongly about, is that the reduction of reliance on key inputs such as artificial fertilizers and pesticides, together with evolving farming systems to embrace complexity and diversity, in general, they do reduce output somewhat, mainly because your yields might be lower, but also, especially within arable systems, if you go to longer rotations and bring in fertility building grass layers, less cash crops to sell, and then it depends on the viability of how you use the grass. I think it's inevitable.
Sorry, Liz, to interrupt. I don't think your slides have moved on.
How far have you got?
Holistic grazing.
Oh, right, that's weird, isn't it? Because I can see it on mine. How do I do that? Should I stop sharing and share again?
Yeah, that may be, yeah, probably just a glitch.
I'll try it again. Sorry. Thank you for telling me. At least it wasn't on slide 1. I was thinking, oh my lord, that's on slide 1. That would be really bad.
I wasn't quite sure, and then Adette messaged me. Is that like the slides? And yeah.
Is it showing up now? A whole load of conclusions and recommendations?
Not quite popped up yet, but it looks like it's doing something.
I think there was just a slight lag, and then it was, as you were speaking, the next slide would come up, and I was like, no, it's not come up yet. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, my Wi-Fi is terrible. I'm back on Sky. We were on line of sight, but they closed it down. Okay, so can you see it now?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Perfect. So yeah, and I was just talking about this whole sort of, because the reason I'm bringing this up at bullet point 3 is that sometimes I get quite sort of frustrated when there's generally big corporations out there that make the case that there's no impact on output from farmers moving to regenerative farming systems. And I think that's a little bit of wishful thinking in many cases. And it might be the case if they carry on with their normal levels of fertilizer application, pesticide application, and simply move to no-till. But in terms of on anything other than carbon, and I've already showed you that the impact on carbon of no-till is not particularly huge. It's certainly going to improve biodiversity. You know, so there's those kind of things that I feel quite strongly we need to sort of make it very clear that the chances are that yields will be lower, not massively, but yes, lower. And then the next recommendation is very much that it's quite a big change for many farmers to move away from the security blankets they've got. And I do feel that there's a real need to bump up how they can pick up this information in order to mainstream it for them. And that's probably one of the biggest things required, actually. And it's coming. And I also feel that there needs to be almost support through this transition period, both financial as well as with practical technical information to bridge the, I'm calling it the uncertainty and learning gap. And I think that will then allow adoption to be faster. So that's all my slides. I hope that was helpful. I'll stop sharing now, unless you want me to leave anything up.
No, that sounds great. That was really, really helpful. Thank you, Liz. Really appreciate that. We've got about 5 minutes for questions, if anybody has any questions. for Liz. John.
Thank you, Liz. That slide that you showed with carbon sequestration levels per hectare for different interventions was absolutely fantastic. Will you be sharing that at all?
I can do. I mean, I can tell you where it's come from. It's in the project report, and it did come from that Green Alliance report that with which Justin Benson led the work on, and I really do commend the report.
If you could send me the individual slide, that'd be great. I'm coming into this, so I might not have seen some things that I expect or not knowing what they were if I did see them. So thank you for taking me through that, because there was lots of counterintuitive stuff in there, I thought, and yeah, really, really interesting.
Was there? Oh, that's interesting that you say that. Yeah. Okay.
Counterintuitive to me, might be what's the intuitive to everyone else, but there we are.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, because I think there is a lot of different notions on how all this works. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
If you're able to send that to us, we can send it on to John. Unless
well, okay. Look, what I'll do is I'll literally send you the slide deck, Tilly. So that's the easiest. Yeah, then you can share it. Yeah.
Thank you. That's great. And I assume the slides they're all form part of the report, which we'll be able to share with everybody anyway.
Yeah, they can do. I mean, they've all been taken from the report. I mean, literally this morning, all I was doing was pulling off tables from the report and slotting them in. So it's all in the report, and it's not a hugely massive report.
Brilliant. Thank you. I look forward to read.
I think James has got a question.
Yeah, James, you've got your hand up, James.
I have. I've got a really interesting piece of work. I've got one technical point, Liz.
Go for it.
Because I think that your addition of mob grazing and overwintering in your partial budget, I think you've gone for two different things. We're not mob grazing, but we're overwintering. I'll come back to mob grazing, and we've seen all those savings that you would do. I think you're right to argue for increased infrastructure costs, because it does cost more, but you do make the savings in the winter. So I think those are two different things. In terms of mob grazing, well, we're running a project with ADAS that are leading it, as you've mentioned. You've mentioned that we both work for ADAS, and they've really struggled to get any. The first part, the literature review, they've really struggled to find any decent data on mob grazing, and some of the anecdotal people shouting about things on mob grazing, I don't think we're seeing in the project so far. And I think people are getting confused between an unmanaged system moving to mob grazing, which is a managed system, and they're getting confused between a managed and unmanaged system, and they're putting all their benefits down to mob, which is purely but they're now running a managed compared to an unmanaged system. But that's sort of a opinion. But I've got two sort of on things. I think the holistic thinking is the key that you've raised in that.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to value a payment for that, though, isn't it? Because
it's so hard.
Yeah, you've got to change. People have got to change the way they're thinking, and it does cost more to think like that and run your farm. The other one, which isn't really, it's not your problem, Liz, but I'd like your views on it, because I was talking to Tilly about this earlier. I think that the way that they've asked you to run their project to look at tenant farms but the group of farms that we have here are basically universities that run their own farms, and they've asked you to prepare a piece of work that doesn't help 90% of the group that they've got here. So I wondered if you'd thought about how that work might be translated not only into tenant farms. University might be tenanting, encouraging tenants, but also in the universities that are running their own farms. How are they going to get that sort of payment or level of recognition, or is it only for tenant farmers? And that's where we're moving on. So that's just a question really for us as a group, perhaps. But I wondered what your views on it were.
That's really interesting, and thank you, James. So on this mob grazing and overwintering, the reason I put them together was simply that there was this sort of notion that if you're going to keep livestock out longer in the winter or in the autumn, your soil health needed to be good so they wouldn't poach. That was kind of the reason for it. And I guess also because I think, like you, I don't think I could really find any financial benefit from mob grazing unless I did that, if I'm brutally honest. I'm kind of, I guess I could have been that brutally honest and made that point. I guess I didn't want to risk the wrath of the likes of the PFLA, because I think they would say that there are benefits, but it's interesting what you say you're finding with ADAS. And I think there may be benefits, but I suspect that they're currently anecdotal only, and it's remarkably difficult to, and as you say, it's about comparing a managed with a non-managed, and it's remarkably difficult because they literally have to put in place 2 different systems over long enough to be able to compare one with the other, and that's not a quick job. So I'm not sure what I do about those 2, or that practice. I mean, I'm open to splitting them out again, because yeah, and in a way, perhaps the answer is I just make it much more abundantly clear in the notes that really the vast majority of the financial benefits come from shortening the winter, i.e. shortening the winter housing period. Then yes, I absolutely agree with you that holistic thinking is the key, and it is about changing people's mindsets. And that was really what I was trying to say in that recommendation about needing to somehow, and it wouldn't really matter whether they were tenants or landowners really, because although the piece of work was requested to support universities in deciding what financial incentives they would provide to tenants, I would say the majority of the findings would be equally applicable to a farmer who's a landowner as well. So I kind of, but I appreciate that the rationale for that overall whole project was to do with supporting tenants. But I think I would say just about all the findings within the piece of work that we've done would be equally applicable to landowning farmers as well as to tenants, other than the one of suggesting that institutional landlords actually do something to help.
No, that's great, thank you. No, stick to your guns on what the benefits and non-benefits of mob grazing, though, please.
Yeah, I will, and thank you. But in a way, it's helpful to have that kind of backup, because yeah, it feels sometimes like for some of these practices, there's a big sense of wanting them almost to be considered great when the evidence isn't necessarily there. And that was part of the rationale for putting that earlier slide up, to show you the sort of lack of evidence for many of these practices.
Thank you so much, Liz, for going through those slides and explaining the work that you've been doing. It's really, really interesting. I'm so excited to have had you on board and have this. It's going to be really, really valuable. So thank you, and thank you to our other speakers as well that we've had today. It's been really interesting, I think, and a really good overall kind of look at where we've kind of got to with the pilot and what we've been working on. In the last 2 minutes, I'm going to condense what I had allowed 10 minutes for, which is cool. We might just have to skip over the any other business bit. But I just wanted to say, actually, if you could just go on to the next slide, please, Adette, that would be fab. So we just want to continue. So this was the last of the pilot project. This is the last advisory group meeting, last working group meeting and that's why we decided to put it all together. Going forward, especially just next year, if we get this extension funding, we would like to continue with the advisory group meetings and the soil and the biodiversity and the farm groups. There isn't any need to continue with the financial working group, as we've kind of decided on what model that we're going for now. We've spoken to various members of the groups, individually and in groups, who have said that they would like to carry on next year. If you aren't somebody we've spoken to and you wouldn't like to carry on for whatever reason, capacity or not relevant, please just drop us an email or in the chat here. Otherwise, we will continue to invite you to meetings. And that's and yeah, if you could just go on to the next slide, please, Adette. We just wanted to say thank you so much for everything that you've done. We really appreciate all of your help during the pilot phase of the Carbon and Nature. We're excited to head into phase 2 and love you all to be there with us, because yeah, everything we've done is definitely been a collaborative effort with many different people. And want to wish you a wonderful festive break and a fantastic new year. And thank you very much. And just on time, 5 o'clock. I'll stop the recording. Thank you all very much. Take care.